Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the composition of the atmosphere as well as a little bit about what the atmosphere is and what it does for us. So let's get out some handy dandy Cornell notepaper. Okay, here we go. So make sure you put your name, date, and class period up here. Our topic for today is composition of the atmosphere, and we've got two essential questions that we're going to answer. What is the atmosphere and what is it made of? So if at any point in time I'm going a little too fast, just feel free to pause the video, jot stuff down, make sure you're listening to what I'm saying now. It's really important to do that. So let's get started on our notes. So the atmosphere is, it's actually a pretty cool thing. First, its definition is that it surrounds all of Earth. And it's pretty cool. It seems like it's really big to us, but in comparison to Earth, we're really tiny. So it's actually this really thin layer. To compare, if the Earth were like an egg, the atmosphere wouldn't even be as thick as the shell. If you took the egg and boiled it, it's just not very thick. So we're pretty small, so we might make a note here that it's fairly thin or thick, depending on how you compare it. The reason we have an atmosphere is because Earth's gravitational pull holds it there. Gravity holds you down, gravity holds me down, the table, it holds everything down, including the atmosphere. Things that float in the atmosphere float because the atmosphere holds them up. They're just very light in comparison to the rest of the atmosphere. But it's gravity that holds it down also. What it does for us is actually pretty important. There's several things that the atmosphere does for us. First, it supports life, and it does that by providing or by having oxygen in the atmosphere that we breathe. That's O2 for oxygen. It also provides carbon dioxide for plants too. We actually kind of work together there. It also holds moisture, and that's important because that's where we get our weather. We also need water to live in addition to that, so and that supports a whole lot of different life processes for a bunch of different animals and plants. It also protects us from space, and we're talking like some extreme temperatures. It's super cold in space, and also from space junk. There's a lot of junk in space that our atmosphere kind of protects us from, like asteroids, if they were to get close enough, become meteors. Meteors tend to burn up in the atmosphere before they ever hit the ground, and even really big ones that do hit the ground get burnt up quite a bit. If we had no atmosphere, they wouldn't burn up at all, and they would hit the ground and make a big, big crater, even if they weren't as big as they would be now. The last thing that it does for us is that it regulates temperatures. And what's really cool about that is that if we were to live on, say, the moon does not have an atmosphere to speak of, and so here on Earth we have some pretty regular temperatures. It doesn't get too hot in the day, and it doesn't get too cold at night. It's warmer in the summer, colder in the winter, but on the moon, in one day, it can go from being, I don't know why I wrote regular, it can go from being unusually cold, I'll write this way, there we go, moon, it can go from being negative 243 degrees Fahrenheit at night to being 253 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. 253 degrees Fahrenheit is hot enough to boil water. So just being outside on the moon during the day is going to make it hot enough to boil water. That's why astronauts have to wear those big suits to be able to function on the moon. So we're going to flip over to the back side of this paper, and we're going to jot down some information about what is in the atmosphere. So we're going to talk about the composition right here. The topic is the composition of the atmosphere, and this is where we're going to get down to the nitty and gritty. What is in the atmosphere? Okay, so it's really a mixture of gases, And those gases could be maybe something from the periodic table, maybe it's a compound that is a gas. You're going to be familiar with some of these, but there's also dust and particles out there, but when we talk about the composition of the atmosphere, we're really talking about the gases that make it up. And those dust particles and dirt and whatnot that might be floating around, those do something else for us, which we'll get to later on. So I like charts. Here's a chart that we're going to fill out. We're going to list the gas, its symbol if it has one, and then how much of it is in the atmosphere. So the first one, the number one is nitrogen. Nitrogen gas. There's actually more nitrogen gas in the atmosphere than oxygen, quite a bit more. It's N2 when it's a gas, and it makes up 78.084%. That's like a C plus as far as grades go, so most of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Up next in the list is oxygen. Oxygen is the second one. The oxygen that you breathe is O2, and it makes up almost the rest of it, 20.947%, which rounds up to about 21%. So that last 1% of the atmosphere comes from other places. So there's two more gases that have a large enough amount that they get listed here. And the first one is argon, which maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. It's AR. It's a noble gas. It doesn't respond to things. It's just out there floating around, no big deal. And it makes up 0.934. It's such a small amount. It's not even very much of it at all. The next one that is worth listing would be carbon dioxide. And that's CO2. This is the stuff that we breathe out, that plants breathe in. We make a good combo here. And it makes up 0.033. So it's even smaller. It's a very tiny percent. There are several other gases, many. There's at least 10 in the list in your reading page. There's even more gases that are in the atmosphere, but they're just really small amounts. They measure them in parts per million, so if you had 1 million particles from the atmosphere, there'd only be 18 of those would be neon. So that's just not very much. Those guys together, if we were to add that up, if we added up all the percentage right here, we're talking about 99.998% of the atmosphere. So if you had $100 in pennies, most of those pennies would be nitrogen, oxygen, argon, or carbon, and then not even a whole penny would be some other stuff. Okay, so it's a lot of different little pieces there. Now, the other thing that we talk about being in the atmosphere is water vapor. Water vapor is kind of this weird thing. Let me pick a different color here. Let's go with purple. Oops. Water vapor is kind of always there, and it varies drastically how much is in the air. So on average is about 4% of the water or of the atmosphere. It's of the total volume. It's 4% of the volume. But that can go up or down depending on how humid it is, how hot or how cold it is. So the water vapor really kind of depends. When there is more water vapor, there's usually less of the nitrogen and some of the other gases. But it's about 4% most of the time. So that's what makes up the atmosphere. So to have good Cornell paper, you need to fill out a summary. It's right here. Just fill that out. And then the columns over on this side of the paper are where you ask yourself questions that you might use to help yourself study when you use these notes later to prepare for tests or quizzes. Submit pictures of this to the notes in the folder in Schoology. Thanks for watching.